time.
Kia ora, good afternoon. You're with Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. If you're just joining us, the Prime Minister and the Director General of Health are giving a press conference. The main points: from midnight tonight, Auckland will drop from Alert Level 3 to Alert Level 2. There will be some exceptions to that. Papatoetoe High School, which is at the centre of this latest outbreak, will remain closed until next Monday. Now, this follows on from 3 additional community cases today. One of those cases is a classmate of one of the originally infected people and that person's brother. A third person from their household has also tested positive this afternoon. The Director General of Health says the good news is that they are all tightly linked. There are epidemiological links and they are encouraged by that. Students returning to Papatoetoe High School when it opens next week will all have to have returned a negative test. The rest of the country from midnight tonight will move from level 2 to level 1. Now, the Prime Minister is urging Aucklanders that over the weekend they must strictly keep to level 2 restrictions, meaning that, well, travel outside of the region is discouraged. In social settings, there can be no more than 100 people, and hospitality must resort to those rules. That is the 3 S's: seated, with a server, and separated. Businesses will now qualify for a resurgence COVID payments, which was introduced in legislation yesterday. So businesses will be able to apply for financial assistance as a result of a raised alert level that will last 7 days or more. We will go into more detail throughout our program this evening with interviews with epidemiologists and virologists. We'll also speak to the Auckland Mayor Phil Goff and the principal of Papatoetoe High School.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. Auckland will move to Alert Level 2 at midnight tonight, while the remainder of New Zealand will move to Level 1. The region went to Level 3 lockdown and the rest of the country to Level 2 at midnight on Monday morning after 3 community cases in South Auckland were found over the weekend. 3 more people have since tested positive for COVID-19, a close contact of an existing case and 2 of their family members. Jacinda Ardern says those restrictions will remain in place until Monday, when they will again be reviewed by Cabinet.
My expectation is that we have a similar situation to what we have now, where we have cases that have already been identified as close contacts, for instance, then we should be in a position to move alert levels again.
Jacinda Ardern says she is confident in the drop of alert levels because the majority of close contacts have returned negative tests. Health officials believe there's about 10% of the population who they won't be able to sway to get a COVID-19 vaccine. A new Ministry of Health survey reveals the majority of people are keen, but 24% aren't confident the vaccine is safe. Auckland University's School of Population Health Professor Chris Bullen says they will focus on those who are undecided to try and change their minds.
There's a group of people in there who might be persuaded otherwise. I think we can roughly say there's a sort of hardcore of about 10% people who would absolutely not, and they may be very hard to persuade. But I think the other group of maybe 10 to 15% are in that hesitant but persuadable group.
Auckland University Professor Chris Bullen. Security agencies were keeping tabs on the New Zealand-born woman detained in Turkey over links to Islamic State. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern yesterday lambasted Australia for revoking Suhaira's Aden citizenship, lumping New Zealand with responsibility for her and her 2 young children. The minister responsible for the spy agencies, Andrew Little, says Aden was on New Zealand's radar. He says he is also aware that her family in Australia were in touch with authorities here.
We've definitely been receiving information from authorities overseas as to her whereabouts. She's a New Zealand citizen, and obviously we maintain an interest in a New Zealand citizen in those circumstances. We knew that if and when she got out of Syria, we would get a notification at some point. So receiving it was not a complete surprise. It's about what happens from here.
Andrew Little cannot say how many other New Zealanders are still in Syria. The College of Midwives wants the government to urgently step up and support a pay equity claim for the profession. Midwives in the Wellington region say they are working themselves to physical and emotional exhaustion because if they don't, mothers and babies could die. The Capital and Coast DHB confirms that of its roughly 61 full-time staff, 17 positions are vacant, nearly a third of its midwifery workforce. The college's chief executive, Alison Eddy, says this is a nationwide problem. It says DHBs are working hard to remedy staffing shortages, but they are limited by a lack of funding and resourcing, and the Midwives Union pay equity claim remains unsettled. Broadcaster Marcus Lush has been elected to the Invercargill City Council. A councillor role has been vacant since the former Deputy Mayor resigned in October. The council has come under increased scrutiny from the Department of Internal Affairs following reports of infighting and concerns about their ability to govern. Voting closed at midday with 9 candidates vying for the role. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. Luna Rossa are at odds with America's Cup management about when the Challenger Series final should resume. The Italian syndicate are leading Team UK 4-0 in the Best of 13 series, which has been on hold since Auckland went into lockdown. America's Cup events want to postpone racing until the city is back at alert level 1. But Luna Rossa claim the regatta should resume behind closed doors as early as Friday. The Italians have also stated that if the final cannot be completed by next Wednesday, they intend to declare the leading points scorer the challenger for the 36th America's Cup. Ash Barty's bid to become the first homegrown Australian Open champion since 1978 has ended for another year. The world number one has been upset in the quarterfinals of the women's singles by the Czech Republic's Karolina Muchova. Muchova came back from a set and a breakdown to win in 3 sets.
I was a bit lost on the court and my head was spinning, so I took a break and it helped me. I tried to play it a bit faster rally so we don't play that long ones as in the first set and it worked well.
Karolina Muchova. The New Zealand challengers also over at the Australian Open. Marcus Daniel and his Austrian playing partner Philip Oswald have been beaten in the quarterfinals by the men's doubles. The Wellington Phoenix have bolstered their forward stocks after scoring just 6 goals in their opening 6 games of the A-League football season. The Phoenix have signed former Sydney and Brisbane striker Charles Lokole-Ngoi for the remainder of the season. That's the news.
Getting closer to the story.
Miss Aiden struck me as a truly honest person who really regretted the choices she made.
Wild winds delay ferries.
It was long, but it was friendly. They gave us fish and chips for dinner.
And an ancient royal brewery's uncovered in Egypt.
The early kings that were buried in Abydos, we find huge deposits, tens of thousands of pottery vessels that we know once contained beer.
A nutritional start to your day. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
The short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland fine in the west, but cloudy periods with the odd shower in the east. Auckland to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty, central high country and Wairarapa. Generally fine, some cloudy areas about Bay of Plenty, Taihape and Wairarapa. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mostly cloudy with a few showers, becoming fine tomorrow afternoon. For all of the South Island, fine, apart from cloudy areas about Bulla. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few light showers. RNZ National. It's 6.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, good evening. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. From midnight tonight, Auckland will drop down to COVID Alert Level 2 and the rest of the country returns to Alert Level 1. There are 3 new cases in the community today. 2 are siblings from Papatoetoe High School and a third is a family member. Joining me now is the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins. Good evening, Minister. How can Auckland go to Level 2 when you don't know the source of this and you've got 3 new cases today?
The key thing we wanted to eliminate through our Alert Level 3 was the risk of there being undetected community transmission. So we've done a good wave of testing, of contact tracing around these cases to identify whether or not there was undetected community transmission. We're now satisfied that the risk of that is low. We're not completely out of the woods yet. We're going to Level 2. We're not going all the way down to Level 1. But we are confident that around the rest of the country, New Zealand can return to Level 1. And in Auckland, we've still got a little bit more work to do. 2, but we'll move back to level 1 when we can. We just need another few days at level 2, and then we'll touch base and we'll reassess that.
Right, so it's the detail that matters here, so let's get into some of it. The new cases, do you have proof that they caught it from the first family, or could it be the other way around?
No, the fact that they are new cases, so the CT values suggest that they are recent cases, that they've only just recently been infected, and that they've been incubating, the virus for a shorter period of time. That suggests that it was the student in the first group, case A in this particular instance, has passed it on to the 2 other students, or to one of the other students, who's then passed it on to her sibling, and then one or the other of them have passed it on to their mother.
Okay, so does the mother work outside of the household?
No, my understanding is that the mother's been isolating for that period of time, so there's no additional public health risk as a result of that.
And there's no risk to her having been infected before she was placed in isolation?
No, but my understanding is that that there's no risk around that. The risk around the sibling is reasonably low as well, although not no risk. And the public health officials are currently working their way through that, including identifying workplaces and visits and any events of interest, and then we'll make sure that we do testing around that. So we're now in the position with these 3 extra cases of treating them similarly to the way we did our Northland case, our Defence Force case.
Right, I'm sorry to interrupt, Minister, but there's a lot to get through, so I just want to address some of the new information. One of these people works at McDonald's, so what does that mean in terms of the context, and who is the person who works at McDonald's?
So it is, my understanding is it's one of the 3, and my understanding is...
So a student rather than the mother?
Yes, that's correct. My understanding is that the early advice that we've had around the time period in question here is that the risk is still quite low, that they would have been infectious during the time that they were working at McDonald's. Now, there's an important distinction to make here because it relates to our alert level decision. We're now treating these 3 new cases the same as we would have done if we had not already been at alert level 3 and alert level 2 for the rest of the country. So we're relying on our contact tracing system to isolate their close contacts, to do the testing, to stamp out the virus that way. The alert level escalation is for where there could be undetected community transmission.
Well, there could still be, couldn't there, Minister? There could be undetected community transmission, and bear with me here. The ring of infection has just moved out one step further because you have somebody now who is infected, who worked at McDonald's, and these 3 will also have their own set of close contacts, will they not?
No, but that's the point. So these were already close contacts. They'd already been identified as close contacts. We can do contact tracing for them. The reason for the alert level escalation over the weekend was that we did not know the source. We did not know whether it was circulating in the community, and we needed to do a wave of rapid testing, which we have done, to discount that possibility. You can't afford to mess around with that because if you do wait until you've identified the source, potentially you're 3 or 4 days down the track and the growth of the virus can be exponential during that time.
So the girl who was infected today, who has tested positive, is a classmate of the original student. Were they friends outside of school?
Oh, look, I don't have that level of information, but certainly, case A is the one that has transmitted this to the most likely scenario is that case A is the one who's transmitted this to our 2 new cases, or one of our new cases, who has then transmitted it to the other 2.
Was Cabinet unanimous in deciding that this was the best way to go?
Look, I mean, as you know, we don't really reveal the details of Cabinet conversation. It was a good, robust conversation.
So what does that mean? There were some dissenters?
No, not at all. I think what you'll find is that all Cabinet members want to really understand it. They want to understand the risks, and then we make a collective decision based on that.
Do you know what the source is yet?
No, we don't yet know what the source is. At this point...
Doesn't that leave us exposed, Minister? Because if there's a gap, you don't know what the gap is. We can't plug it, can we?
Well, to be let's reflect on some of our earlier investigations. In terms of the Auckland cluster around the Coles store back in August, we were never able to fully identify the source for that. The reason that we had confidence to move out of our alert level systems that we had done enough testing around that case to know that we had it contained.
But we could be repeating the same mistake, Minister. We don't know the source of that original thing. How do we know that this is not caused by the same sort of systems failure?
Well, the thing is, I would certainly not call it a system failure. At this point, we don't know how the people were infected in the first place, but we know from testing all of the people around them that the risk of it spreading out there in the community is sufficiently low that we can lower the alert levels. Now, we still continue with our investigations, and we still continue with our testing and our contact tracing to isolate anybody who has COVID-19 or who might have COVID-19 so that it doesn't get out there into the community and spread out more widely.
What happens if there are more infections over the next few days and over the weekend?
It'll depend on the nature of those investigations, of those infections, as it always does. If they are people who are known contacts, who are already isolating, then there is no need for alarm. If they're not, if we're seeing, new cases that are not connected to our existing cases, then that's something that we'd consider differently, and then we make those decisions based on what the information tells us at the time.
So you're absolutely sure that you've made the right decision today?
Oh, I'm very confident in the decision that we've made today. I'm certainly not going to say that there won't be more cases out of this cluster, but as long as they are connected to the cluster and they are, and our contact tracing system is identifying them, then we can manage that without the need for alert level escalation.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That is the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins. It is 15 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, still to come on the program, we'll get reaction from businesses and epidemiologists to this decision to drop down alert levels. But the Auckland Mayor, Phil Goff, is with me now. Phil, is this the right decision, do you reckon?
I think it's the right decision, Lisa. It's always a challenge to find the balance between what you need to do to contain the spread of the virus and not to move more restrictively than you need to, interrupting people's lives and disrupting business. So they've done this on the basis of advice from the Ministry of Health and the Director General, and I think it's always important in these cases not to make a political decision, but to follow the advice of those people who are expert and you pay to advise you in these areas, and they've done that.
When did you find out?
I found out just before the public announcement was made. Obviously, it was a challenging decision because, while we've got...
Did they canvass your opinion, Phil? Did you have input?
Look, I have ongoing discussions with government. The decisions they make are decisions for Cabinet and they're advised by their health experts. But we let them know what's happening in Auckland, what the impact on Auckland is, what the sort of feedback we're getting is, and there's a two-way flow of communication there.
In doing that, did you express a desire to go down a level?
Look, my desire was to do what was necessary to contain the spread of the virus while minimising the disruption to people's lives and businesses. And the conclusion that the Ministry of Health has reached is that this is the right thing to do. And I'm accepting of that and welcoming of it from the viewpoint of Aucklanders who do get their lives back now and the businesses that were being, put under extreme pressure, some of them because of a level 3 lockdown type situation. Which severely cuts into their income.
So, Mr Mayor, is the Ponsonby Rainbow Pride event happening this weekend?
I haven't heard that yet. I think it would probably not be happening because it means the requirements of level 1 is that you restrict the number.
Level 2, rather, Mr Mayor.
Level 2, should say level 2 to the numbers of people to 100 only. Now, the Pride Parade would be much larger than that, so I suspect that it won't be going ahead.
Is there anything about this that still makes you a little bit nervous going to level 2?
Oh, look, you're continually nervous about a virus that is rampant around the world and destroying people's lives and livelihoods. So, every day at 1 o'clock, I want to know whether there have been community transmission cases. The government has the flexibility, of course, to move backwards and forwards between levels, so I'm sure they'd prefer not to do that. They've made the assessment at this stage on the best knowledge, on the basis of extensive testing, that this is under control. That's not to say that there won't be an increase in numbers, but they have it under control and they understand the line of transmission, even though they don't know the original source of it. So it is about balance. If they'd kept at level 3, you'd be asking me a different set of questions, I guess. Isn't this overkill? Isn't it going too far? Which is what some of the media said at the beginning of this whole process. I think they've gone for balance. They've gone for a health and science-based approach, and they've got the right result.
What about compliance? Okay, so when we got told we were going into level 3 in Auckland, man, there was bumper-to-bumper traffic that night, and level 2 still doesn't mean that you should go wobbling off all over the place. So what do you want to say to people about that?
Well, it is important to comply. To carry the level with you is what the Prime Minister has said. Now, look, that's impossible to enforce. And, I'm sure just with the same thing with going to level 3, some of the people that were clogging the motorways on Sunday night were people that weren't going for the reasons that they should have. And that puts others at risk of transmission of the virus, should it have been wider than what we have found it to be. So, the advice to people is, if we follow the rules, if we do the right thing, if we act collectively, we'll continue to maintain a situation in New Zealand that's better than any other country in the world. But if you break the rules and you ignore the advice, then you're inviting the spread of this virus, which is still rampant, which is more contagious than it's been before because of the new variants. All of us have a role to play, not just the Ministry of Health or the Prime Minister.
So what does level 2 mean for the America's Cup racing?
Well, that's an interesting question. Team New Zealand has expressed the desire to put things back a week, and the challenger of record, Luna Rossa, has said no way. I think what they need to do is...
Is that irresponsible, given the current situation?
My preference would have been to put it back a week. I think that they will be having discussions with health advisors. It may well be that you have the races and the people, wear their masks or whatever they might be required to do, but you don't have the crowds on the waterfront to watch them. So, I guess if they do go ahead, we'll be watching them on television at a very safe distance.
Phil, we've kicked in, as in the ratepayers and the taxpayer here, so what would your preference be?
In terms of level 2?
How it operates. Put it off and wait and see if we can drop down a level and race then, or level 2 racing and no audience?
Look, if there are no good reasons not to put it back a week, I'd put it back a week. But, Luna Rossa will look at it from a different angle. They'll think that they're on a roll. They'll think that putting it back a week might give the other side a greater advantage, and I suspect that will be influencing their decision. My personal preference is err on the side of caution, put it back a week and allow people to enjoy it. But the rules will probably provide that they have to go in a different direction. But there will be, I imagine, some fairly intense discussions between health authorities and the organisers of the race.
Appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. That's the Auckland Mayor, Phil Goff. We're keen for your feedback on this. So, as of midnight tonight, Auckland goes back down to alert level 2, the rest of the country to alert level 1. What do you think of the decision? Is it the right one, or should we stay at the current levels? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to Papatoetoe in South Auckland now, where today's 3 new cases have been recorded. Our reporter Nick Trubridge is there. Nick, what's happening out there now?
Hi Lisa. Yeah, well obviously it's stark contrast to the situation out here yesterday when cars were flooded all the way down the street in front of me. Testing's closed for the day, everyone's packed up and gone home, but that doesn't mean that there isn't still an onus on testing out here. Of course the school put out a Facebook message not long ago actually asking people to come back and get a second test. They've said that the people who require a second test will receive some communications, and the advice is to come back and get that done. Of course, there are still a number of tests that the school, or that have been done at the school here, that the health authorities are waiting for results on. So quiet here at the moment, but a good chance it'll be full noise again tomorrow.
And what is the mood like on the back of this news that there are 3 other people connected to the school who have now tested positive?
Yeah, Lisa, I've been talking to people most of the week here, and it would be fair to say that the mood is sort of one of nervousness. People have said that it's really hitting home for them. Obviously, the fact that they're within their school mean that they are, there is some trepidation. But the fact that obviously there's the move to level 2 has allayed some of those fears, it would be fair to say. Obviously, though, parents and students associated with the school still rather have to stay home until they've returned a negative test. Back to school on Monday though, so people are happy about that.
Yeah, so in terms of that, just recap for those people who are just joining us. Obviously, Auckland itself as a whole is going down a level at midnight tonight, but Papatoetoe High School is the exception to the rule. So what are the rules for them?
It is different, Lisa, you're right. So while the rest of Auckland can enjoy the relative freedoms of level 2 from tonight, the students and parents associated with the school are still being asked to stay home until they have returned a negative test, until school opens again on Monday. So I suppose it's sort of a section of the South Auckland community that aren't quite out of the woods yet, are still being asked to be careful.
Thanks, Nick. That is Nick Trubridge, who is out in Papatoetoe. Well, joining me now is Auckland University Professor of Medicine, Des Gorman. Good evening, Professor. So, we're moving in Auckland down a level and the rest of the country from midnight tonight. Do you agree with the decision and the logic behind it?
I think I agree with you. I was listening to before when you were talking to Mr. Hipkins. I share your unease, and I think the reason why I share that unease, Lisa, is because the level of risk we seem to be tolerating is going up and down almost imperturbably. For example, the Ministry of Health found out about these cases on Saturday night, but didn't think it was necessary to tell the Prime Minister for 12 hours. And so things which should have been cancelled if we needed to be in level 3, like the big gay out in the America's Cup, weren't. In fact, they didn't provide the Prime Minister the opportunity to cancel them. If level 3 makes sense, then that means we're accepting a very low level of risk. To go to level 2 now, when we actually don't know where this outbreak came from, is accepting a moderate level of risk. So the answer to the question is this an appropriate thing to do or not? Depends upon how much risk you're prepared to live with. And the reason why you and I are confused and uneasy is because the level of risk that seems to be operating here is going up and down, and it means it's not predictable.
Is it sufficient, though, to ring-fence the high school, which is obviously central to this current outbreak? So while the rest of the city is moving down a level, in essence, Papatoetoe High School is still going to operate at that higher alert level in nature, if not by name.
Oh, Lisa, if the suspicion was that the infection came from the school to the first family, then in fact, that's a reason to actually say, well, Papatoetoe High School should be the focus of our attention. But if, as is the case, we're implying it came from the family to the school, we still haven't linked the family to any particular source of infection, which means there is a chain of transmission or a vector out there we haven't found yet. We still haven't explained how that first family became infected. It's a very loose end.
But the Minister, as you perhaps would have heard, seems to be quite adamant that while it would be useful to know the source, it's not essential to know the source in order to loosen up restrictions.
Yeah, I think that's fundamentally true in the sense that often you don't find the source, but you loosen up restrictions when you have a great deal of confidence that, in fact, there is no community transmission going on. I think the most reassuring thing we have, Lisa, is the absence of viral particles in the sewage or the wastewater. I think that's very encouraging. But the reality is, right now, we have a group of people who have been infected somehow, not magically, but somehow, probably person-to-person contact, and we don't know how. And the only way to become confident that you have this ring-fenced is when you have very large volumes of testing being done. And given how mobile communities are, to localise it to Papatoetoe may be the right thing to do, but that's the point I was making to you. How much risk are you prepared to live with? Because what we're doing now is saying we will live with a certain level of risk and just hope that we get through this okay.
We know that the incubation period for the virus is around 14 days. This lockdown and level situation will take us to the 7-day mark. I mean, how does that marry up with the cycle of infection?
Well, we're assuming that people were infected days ago, not now, so they're already well and truly into their incubation period. And they're also assuming that during the highly infectious period, these people were in quarantine. But the reason why you are uncomfortable with this, Lisa, is because the explanation of how that first family got infected remains unclear. We simply don't know. And so the question remains, are there vectors in play? Now, what we're saying at the moment is that there seems to be a low level of infection at the school. There seems to be a low level of infection in the area, but we still have a lot of unexplained things. So if you were operating at the lowest possible level of risk acceptance, you'd extend level 3 for a couple of weeks. That's exactly what you do. But there's a point I made to you before. I can't see a consistency in our risk appetite. It seems to go up and down depending upon the optics of the situation that we're in.
So if you were in charge right now, what would you do?
If I was in charge right now and I had a conversation with the community and the community said, we accept a negligible level of risk, then in fact, when you get an unexplained cluster like this, which you can't link to the border, you go to something like level 3 for 2 weeks. That's what I would do now if I had an unexplained group of people. That is what you would do if you accept the lowest possible level of risk. If the community, though, and Lisa, we have a conversation, look, we'd rather live with a higher level of risk and remain some economic activity, then in fact you do what you're doing now. But you can't have it both ways. You simply have to have some idea of what risk you're prepared to live with, and that should dictate your behaviour consistently so that you and I can say, well, given how we are behaving, this is what predictably will occur now.
Thanks for your time this evening. That is Auckland University Professor of Medicine, Des Gorman there. Businesses in Auckland's Viaduct are wrapped with this afternoon's news that the city will return to alert level 2 from midnight. The Soul Bar has been a popular lunch and dinner waterfront spot over summer for New Zealanders wanting to also catch a glimpse of America's Cup action. Operations Manager Ji Ling Ching told our reporter Louise Tanuth a short time ago her team of 90 staff who can't work from home are thrilled.
We're relieved. I mean, gosh, we really thought that if we were going to carry on at level 3 that would be really bad for our staff, for our business. We've just started to see business pick up again and we're just starting to see momentum. So to lose that momentum would have been absolutely heartbreaking. So we're really relieved level 2 for the next few days and we're hoping that on Monday we get even better news.
Right, and so obviously next step forward, as you said before, was the 3 S's. So what would that look like for you guys? Reduced capacity, I can imagine.
Absolutely reduced capacity. I just spoke to the bar manager who's here. You know, we have to cancel the DJs, so that's more people who are affected, but we can't have dancing on the dance floor. But we've been through this before, so we know exactly what to do. We'll be watching our social distancing, making sure that everyone's seated and single servers.
And as the America's Cup has gone on, how has that affected business for you guys? Has that been a bit of a boost? So obviously moving forward, if that continues, that's another relief on your end.
Absolutely. We really have felt the loss of the overseas tourists here, particularly in the Viaduct with the America's Cup. But the New Zealanders have been fantastic. They've been supporting us, the Cup. It's been amazing. So we really have noticed, and particularly when the last sort of round robin last week was on, that was really busy here. So we're hoping that the Cup will carry on and, you know, we'll have a fantastic March as well.
That's the operations manager of Auckland's Soul Bar, Ji-Ling Ng, and she was speaking to our reporter Louise Tenuth. As you will have probably heard, there are 3 new cases of COVID in the community today, which means there are more places of interest. So let's just cover off some of those. Subway in Otara, and this is on the 15th of February between 12:30 and 1:30. You would be considered a casual plus contact if you have been at that Subway in Otara during that time. Another place of interest, JB Hi-Fi, Manukau, 1:30 to 2:45 on the 14th of February. Skechers, Manukau, and that is on the 14th of February as well, and that's between 2 and 3, casual plus contact for all of those locations. And Westfield, Manukau City Mall, between 1:30 and 3:30 on the 14th of February, and you would be considered a casual contact. Sorry, now if you go onto the Ministry of Health website, all of these locations are listed. They tell you what contact category you fall into and what steps you need to take. So if you're concerned, have a look online for the details. We will put also a link up on our page. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, we talk to the principal of Papatoetoe High School about the news 3 more people connected to his school have tested positive for COVID. The political stoush of a woman allegedly connected to a terrorist group, Islamic State. What should happen to her now? And we check in on the rebuild of Notre Dame Cathedral. We love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Don't forget you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or Facebook us at Checkpoint, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get now to the headlines with Susanna.
Auckland will move to COVID alert level 2 at midnight tonight, while the remainder of New Zealand will move to level 1. The cabinet decision's been announced this afternoon by the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who says the new levels will remain in place for a week. The region went into level 3 lockdown and the rest of the country to level 2 at midnight on Monday morning because of 3 community cases in South Auckland. 3 more people have since tested positive for COVID-19, all connected to the current cluster. Papatoetoe students will need to return a negative COVID-19 test before returning to school on Monday. The Minister of COVID Response, Chris Hipkins, has told Checkpoint the decision was reached after a robust discussion at Cabinet this afternoon. He says testing shows that the risk of further spread is confined and suitably low, but he says things could change if new COVID cases arise outside the existing cluster. And the Mayor of Auckland, Phil Goff, has welcomed the fall in alert levels, telling Checkpoint it's based on the need to contain the virus and minimise disruption. Former American President Donald Trump has launched a scathing personal attack on fellow Republican and Senate leader Mitch McConnell. Mr. Trump's called him a dour, sullen and unsmiling political hack, and the Republican Party won't win again if he's kept on. Mr. McConnell voted to acquit Mr. Trump in his impeachment trial, but then accused him of being morally responsible for the US Capitol riot. Dunedin's King's High School has backed down in its stoush with a student over his hairstyle. Lewis O'Malley Scott, a Year 12 student of African American descent, had his naturally afro hair plaited in cornrows, but was told it was against the rules. The school's rector, Nick McIver, says the school's changed its mind and cleared the pupil's braided style. Marcus Lush has been provisionally elected to the Invercargill City Council. The council says the News Talk ZB broadcaster has received more than half the nearly 14,000 by-election votes counted so far. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go now to Papatoetoe High School Principal Vaughan Quio. He's joining us now. Hi, Vaughan. How are you doing? 3 more positives connected to the school.
Kia ora. Yeah, I'm doing okay. And whilst we would have liked there to be no more positive cases today, we're prepared for the worst, hoping for the best, and it is what it is, really. We've just got to get the job done.
So what can you tell us about the situation there? What advice have you been given? Are some students being retested?
Yeah, there'll be a bit of that over the next couple of days. I haven't got granular sort of information for you, but what I can say is that we've been given advice that we're obviously closed for the remainder of this week, and that's probably really to allow the testing station to remain in play, on site, unencumbered by the happenings of a large secondary school. It's just a little bit easier to get the last little bits mopped up if the campus isn't functioning as it normally would. And the testing station is going to be on site until Sunday. And then when students return to us on Monday, they do have to have had a negative result before they'll be allowed to return to school. And we'll be communicating with the Ministry of Health over the next couple of days, probably actually in the next couple of hours, with regard to what those lists look like and exactly who we're trying to chase up to get a test and who's already had a negative return. So there's a little bit of logistics to do between now and Monday, but we've got a bit of time, we'll get there.
Do you know how the two families are doing?
No, not yet, and on Ministry of Health advice I've sort of stayed away from them because obviously coming to terms with the fact that they're unwell for a start. No one wants to be pestered when they're not feeling 100%, but also their circumstances have changed. They've been moved into a quarantine facility and the public eye has been sort of looking in their direction, and so we're just affording them a little bit of space for their own well-being, to be fair.
Vaughan, what can you tell us about how these two groups of students are connected? In the sense, was the girl who has tested positive, was she just in the same class? Were they friends outside of school? Would they have had further contact? Can you just give us a bit of an idea about how closely connected they are?
So you're talking about the two new cases today?
Yeah.
So the younger of the two today is in Year 9 and in the same learning class and same form class as the student, the original student from Sunday. So they definitely have a very clear link. And looking at the fact that they're in the same form class and same learning class, it's quite likely that they're a tight unit, but I'm drawing conclusions myself there. And then the other positive case today is her older brother, and so that's a pretty clear link too.
So the older brother then, are there any situations outside of school, sports and things like that, which may produce a wider pool of contacts?
So I am not aware of any school-based activities that took place during his infectious period that we've been asked to follow up on. Ministry of Health have obviously been interviewing both new cases to find out what they've been involved in and what they haven't, but the two new cases today were not on site at school during their infectious period.
So separate to all of this, obviously, apart from the positive cases, you're having to deal with disruption to learning. So how is that going?
Yeah, so we've been making Plan A, Plan B and Plan C all this year, right at the very first sort of Principals State of the Nation chat in my staff room. I mentioned to staff that anything could happen this year, and whilst we hope for a long period of in-class and normal teaching and learning, anything could happen. So we've got to make sure we're ready to pivot to an online situation at the drop of a hat. And
so are kids actually doing lessons online? Vaughan, sorry to interrupt, but are they actually engaged and some of them doing lessons online?
Probably not on Monday and Tuesday because most of them were in COVID testing queues, including the teachers. So Monday and Tuesday has been a bit of a write-off, to be fair, and we're re-engaging and turning all those lights on, metaphorically speaking, in the online stuff today.
So Vaughan, how are people feeling about the school opening on Monday?
Yeah, I don't have any feedback from the community about that. I think probably across Auckland there's a sense of relief. I haven't got a sense from my own community about the anxiety levels based around the return on Monday, and I think that people will be able to illustrate that by what my attendance is like on Monday, to be fair. And we are doing a bit of, actually quite a lot of chasing up and pastoral care work remotely from home with form teachers making contact with their form classes and deans working with form teachers. So there's been communication and I haven't had any negative feedback at this point.
Any anxiety among staff?
Always there'll be anxiety amongst anyone in Auckland with this current situation, but the key to easing that anxiety is giving people accurate and timely information when they need it and making sure any of their fears are relayed. And I think the decision that the Ministry has made and Minister Hipkins has made and Cabinet about students being able to return to our school when they have shown a negative test, I think that's sensible and it encourages people that haven't yet got to a testing station to do so, and I fully support that.
Really appreciating you fitting us in your day, Vaughan. Vaughan Queo, who is the Papatoetoe High School principal there. Let's get to business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Hi, Nicholas.
G'day there, Lisa.
Tell us a little bit about Fletcher Building, headlining its financial result today, but who were others making noise?
Yeah, look, it really felt like the financial reporting season got properly underway today as we had a slew of financial results coming through. Now, as you alluded to there, Fletcher Building, that was the big headline result that people probably heard throughout the day, but there were two other significant results, one positive, one not as much, which also made a bit of noise. And beginning with the latter, there was Refining New Zealand, which owns the Marsden Point refinery. And if you've been paying any attention to this company, you'd probably know that the previous 12 months for it have been, by all accounts, the most challenging in its history. It's been battered by reduced fuel demand because of COVID-19, squeezed refining margins caused by a slide in global oil prices. Now, those cost pressures have really come together to see the company post a near $200 million loss as it had to significantly write down the value of its business. Now, the company's already undertaken a number of measures to address these challenges. Last year, it cut about 100 jobs, which is about a quarter of its workforce. It scaled down productions and it signalled moves to move away from refining oil and focus on being simply an import-only terminal for fuel in this country. Now, that process is still underway and has not been finalised. It needs to get all its key stakeholders, which are Z Energy, Mobil and BP, on the same page to do so, but it's sort of clear that things are tracking that way, with the company giving us a bit of guidance saying that it would cost about $200 million over 4 to 5 years to make that transition. But it's a transition, however, which will come at the cost of more jobs being lost. So Refining New Zealand, its share price, it closed today actually up 4%, which is about 2 cents to 50 cents per share. But it's worth mentioning that this company's share price is down by about 67% on the same time a year ago. But that's sort of the bad news out of the way, because one of the real stellar results was EBOS, who shows us that one of the best businesses you could possibly be in during a pandemic is healthcare and pet products. Because if there are two things you can guarantee that people are doing during the coronavirus pandemic, it's they're looking after themselves and their pets. And EBOS, they have businesses in wholesale distribution of pharmaceuticals. They own a handful of pharmacies, as well as pet food companies and the retail chain Animates. And they've posted a record half-year profit, up 14% to 92.8 million Australian dollars. That's compared with about $81 million a year ago. And speaking to the CEO today, he told me that the growth it's seen over the past 6 months, over the past year really, has exceeded all expectations, and it really speaks to the company's diverse product offering. Interestingly, though, he told me that it had just signed an agreement with the government to help distribute the COVID vaccine, which has just landed on our shores. But he wouldn't say any more because that commercial agreement is confidential. So EBOS, one of the real dark horses on the NZX, it closed down about 0.2% or 6 cents a share to $29.11.
And other market numbers in the dollar, Nicholas?
Yeah, on the back of these strong earnings reports we had out today, the NZX is up 63.3 points to close up 12,674. Our dollar is at 71.9 US cents, 92.9 Australian, 51.8 British pence, and Bitcoin, well, it's nearly pushing 69,000 New Zealand dollars for a single Bitcoin.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business news there. It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, after 6 tonight, we'll see how businesses are feeling about the decision from Wellington today, and we'll check in with Victoria with the state moving out of its snap lockdown tonight. Now, a lot of you are getting in contact about the decision that's come this afternoon, which is at midnight tonight. Auckland moves down from level 3 to level 2. Rest of the country moves from 2 to 1. This listener says, good decision, and everyone should practice social distancing and be mindful. Julian's got in touch to say we still don't know the source. There are 3 other cases, and it is the highly infectious UK variant. The risk is much greater than before. Let's hope it's the right decision for all of us. Malcolm writes, I would like to know how the government can be so confident that another close contact won't test positive in another couple of days' time, having circulated in the community in the meantime, giving the incubation period for the virus. I hardly regard a negative test as a guarantee, says Malcolm. Just a note on that, all people identified as close contacts, Malcolm, will be in isolation for 14 days, whether they return a negative test initially or not. And then moving on, this person says, Australia keeps investigating to locate sources of any outbreaks. Our government needs also to do the same. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ with your thoughts on that. The Prime Minister's struck a more conciliatory tone towards Australia after last night's phone call with Scott Morrison. But Jacinda Ardern wouldn't go into detail about their discussion, sticking broadly to a statement issued by her office this morning. She angrily criticised Australia and its Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, yesterday for abdicating responsibility for a terror suspect being detained in Turkey along with her 2 children. Suhara Ardern still has New Zealand citizenship, but moved to Australia when she was 6 and travelled to Syria on an Australian passport. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Yesterday, Ms Ardern's anger was evident.
I need only describe the situation to you for you to get a sense of how wrong their decision was. This is clearly an individual whose links sit most closely with Australia.
Scott Morrison, though, bullish when asked about her comments.
Well, my job is Australia's interests. That's my job. And it's my job as the Australian Prime Minister to put Australia's national security interests first. So I think all Australians would agree with that.
A call last night and a statement this morning that Ms Ardern wouldn't stray from when asked about the details this afternoon.
Just that recognition of the legal complexities, but also that there are conversations to be had given the relationship that we have as well. But I don't want to go too far on that.
Nationals leader Judith Collins describes the standoff as unfortunate.
I don't think these 2 countries, Australia and New Zealand, need to fall out over this terrorist. It's really important that we can do better as 2 countries.
National MP Jerry Brownlee, a former foreign minister, playing down any damage to the relationship.
Oh, look, I don't think the Australians are seeing it like that, and I don't think we should ramp it up to be anything more than what it is. A bit of annoyance about having to deal with a problem, and the problem being a terrorist who wanted to destroy both countries' lifestyle.
Jacinda Ardern says there are still a lot of unknowns and hypotheticals about the future of the woman and her children, but says New Zealand's national security will be taken very seriously, including if she ends up back here.
We will be making every effort in that scenario, if it were to occur, to ensure that we knew as much as possible to prepare and protect New Zealanders. But again, a lot of water to go under the bridge before we get to any point like that.
The minister responsible for the spy agencies, Andrew Little, says New Zealand's been kept up to date about this woman by other countries, but now the focus is on what happens next.
She has crossed the border from a conflict zone. She's identified with organisations and forces that are hostile to a range of interests, and there is now an international process to deal with what happens to her next. We will be dealing with Turkey. Obviously there's issues about her interests in Australia still, so we will maintain contact with Australia about that.
Mr Little was asked if New Zealand's had any requests for help from the woman being held in Turkey. He says her family in Australia has been in touch with New Zealand authorities, but would give few other details, including how many other New Zealanders may still be in Syria. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
And joining me now is Anjum Rahman from the Islamic Women's Council New Zealand. Kia ora, Anjum.
Kia ora.
Who do you think should be responsible for this woman?
Primarily, it's the responsibility of the Australian government. Clearly, whatever happened in terms of her thinking happened while she was in Australia. I can't imagine that she would have been radicalised at 6 years old when she left. And her family is over there. Therefore, they are definitely responsible for this.
But how do we get around the impasse then? Because she does have 2 young children and Australia has basically cut ties with her.
Well, if there is no movement on their part, then I think it is incumbent on New Zealand to take them in, given that she was born here, and thinking about the welfare of those 2 children. We do need to step up, I think, if Australia doesn't.
And when you say take them in, you mean the woman and her children?
Yes, I think, when we think about criminal justice and that kind of area, we always hold the hope that people can be rehabilitated and put back into the community. And given that she was just 19 when she was over there, we hope that if she does come back here, that she is put through a de-radicalisation program. We know that the police have received just over $8 million to develop one. So that needs to happen, along with all the social support that she would need in order to come back to this country.
And what does that look like when you put someone through a de-radicalisation program? Because when people turn to things like this, some would argue that their views are pretty entrenched. Do they actually work, these programs?
We think that about all sorts of crimes, that they're not going to change. Sometimes people don't change, but a lot of times they do. And we see a lot of successful examples of people that have been reintegrated back into the community. Obviously, she would need to be checked on and monitored. We know that there's a lot of research that goes into successful rehabilitation. We know that having family networks, support from the community, all of those things are really important to ensure that that happens properly.
And the thing is, those things don't exist for here in New Zealand, do they, Anjum? Because her family is in Australia.
Absolutely. The family is not here, and that's why the moral responsibility definitely sits with Australia. But the fact is that if she comes here, the government needs to put significant resourcing into that, into providing mental health support and social support. But in terms of our community, what we can provide is the community networks and support with social integration. And if the government steps up, then we will definitely step up to do our part.
And when you say we, do you mean the Islamic Women's Council? Would you be prepared to offer this woman support if she was brought home to New Zealand?
So we're not a very well-resourced organisation. We certainly don't have the expertise and that wider knowledge, which is why government needs to do that. And they need to develop that not just for this woman, but there are other forms of extremism that happen in our country that equally need that kind of support. So we would hope that would be in place. We would definitely need the mental health and those other things to be in place, but we certainly would be able to work with other organisations in the community and ensure that she has the best chance.
And very quickly, before you go, a lot of people will say, we don't want a bar of this woman. What do you say to them?
I think it's easy to say that, but there are those two children there, and we want to, and we have a responsibility to make sure that they have the best chance at success in life.
Thank you for joining us. That is Anjum Rahman, who is from the Islamic Women's Council, New Zealand. Health officials believe there's about 10% of the population they won't be able to convince to get a COVID-19 vaccine. A new survey by the Ministry of Health shows the majority of people are keen, but there's a group on the fence who aren't confident the vaccine is safe. Charlotte Cook reports.
Border workers will this weekend roll back their sleeves for their first dose of the Pfizer vaccine. But the Ministry of Health's study shows about a quarter of the rest of the population won't be so keen. Of that group, 16% said they would outright refuse. Auckland University's School of Population Health Professor Chris Bullen says the group that remains undecided is where health officials will focus.
There's a group of people in there who might be persuaded otherwise. I think we can roughly say there's a sort of hardcore of about 10% people who would absolutely not, and they may be very hard to persuade. But I think the other group of maybe 10 to 15% are in that hesitant but persuadable group.
The research shows those most likely to say no will be female, have a lower household income, fewer education qualifications, or be a parent. Safety and concerns about side effects are the key reasons for vaccine hesitancy. Officials believe a lot of that can be attributed to the disinformation swirling on social media, especially for Māori and Pasifika communities. The Director of Pacific Health, Geraldine Clifford Lidstone, says they've been tracking social media for a while and can see there's already a level of scepticism, particularly in the comments of the 1 p.m. briefing.
The advice to us is that we need to counter with facts quite quickly, and what we're going to try and do is respond quite quickly by putting facts out on that social media stream. That seems to be the place at the moment where people are going, so that's probably going to be our approach.
The study also shows Māori and Pacifica have less confidence in the safety and quality of the vaccine. Deputy Director of Māori Health, John Whanga, says they'll be working hard to ensure that everyone has a chance to get accurate information.
There will be more than one opportunity to be trying to influence people. So it is really important that we don't see, I think, anybody as a lost cause. We're really interested in making sure that we get the best information out. It's our intention to take a comprehensive approach and to leave no stone unturned in terms of providing good information and opportunities for people to be vaccinated.
Almost 70% of people surveyed say they'll get a vaccine that is well tested and approved, with the highest uptake expected to be those 65 and over. The Ministry of Health's Martin Chadwick wants to remind those who are hesitant that any potential vaccine offered will have to meet MedSafe and New Zealand's safety standards.
It's our own process that we go through, so it was not simply accepting what we've seen elsewhere in the world. It was taking up what we need for Aotearoa New Zealand and to go through our own independent process. So when it comes to giving confidence, there's the assurity that we have gone through our own process to ensure that it is safe and effective within our context.
He says data from the trials, where hundreds of thousands of doses have been administered, shows the most common side effects are a sore shoulder and a mild headache. MedSafe will continue to watch for any further developments. For Checkpoint, Charlotte Cook.
Some Aucklanders say they're stoked to be stepping down to Alert Level 2. Whilst it still means restrictions on numbers in venues and at gatherings, people at Auckland's Viaduct told reporter Louise Tenuth they're relieved.
Well, I think we're pleased because, it'd be nice for the businesses particularly to be able to get back into business. I think that's really important. But I think it's the right thing to do it ostensibly and steadily. I mean, we're really impressed coming from the UK. We're here with the sailing team and, the fact that you've reacted so quickly to these cases is a lesson, I think, for the rest of the world, to be honest. But it's nice to see it coming back. I'm pleased for the locals. It's good.
Pretty stoked to get back to work. Yeah,
so
pretty happy.
Why is that? Why are you so stoked? What does it change for you?
Oh, just back into the normal routine of things. I just prefer working at work rather than at home, so yeah, pretty happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's great news. I think it was the right call to make, to go hard and to go early, and just really pleased that people will be able to get at least back to a little bit of kind of normal. I work with a lot of groups with what I do in the arts, so really nice that rehearsals can resume with proper social distancing.
I'm happy, honestly. I'm happy to be back, and I'm happy my son goes to school.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Not phased?
Yeah.
Same old?
Yeah.
And that was Louise Tenuth speaking to Aucklanders down at the Viaduct there. And some more of your feedback on the shift in levels from midnight tonight. For Auckland, 3 down to 2, and the rest of the country 2 to 1. This person says the government seems to be making decisions based on facts and good evidence. I wonder if others criticising the level changes have been as fastidious with their own contact tracing and prevention measures. Another listener says, we should not be going down a level. The cautious approach has served us well. Why risk it all now? Very bad decision, they say. And Vanessa's been in touch to say, if our team of 5 million has dodged a bullet, we are very lucky. Still shambolic across government agencies, not talking to locals or health providers. Some voices are still invisible and we can do and must do better, says Vanessa. So if you're just joining us, 3 new cases in the community today. All are connected to the school, Papatoetoe High School. Auckland moves from level 3 to level 2 midnight tonight.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātau tēnei. The Prime Minister says there's every chance more community cases of COVID-19 could be discovered in Auckland. The region will move to Alert Level 2 at midnight tonight after spending 3 days in Level 3 lockdown, while the rest of the country will move to Level 1. Papatoetoe High School students and their families, however, have been asked to stay at home until they return a negative test. This is in light of 2 new community cases today who are students at the school. A household contact of the students has also tested positive. Jacinda Ardern says it's possible more people could test positive.
While our expectation is that these will be linked to our current cases, we still need Aucklanders to follow the level 2 rules, especially over the weekend, so that we can get the extra assurance we need to get back to level 1 as soon as possible next week.
Cabinet will review the alert level settings on Monday. The COVID-19 response minister says the risk of further community spread remains low, despite a Papatoetoe High School student who works at McDonald's testing positive today. The student, along with their sibling and another household contact, tested positive today. Chris Hipkins has told Checkpoint the new cases were already identified as close contacts of an earlier case and were isolating, so the risk of transmission is minimal.
We're now treating these 3 new cases the same as we would have done if we had not already been at alert level 3 and alert level 2 for the rest of the country. So we're relying on our contact tracing system to isolate their close contacts, to do the testing, to stamp out the virus that way. The alert level escalation is for where there could be undetected community transmission.
Anyone who visited the Cavendish Drive McDonald's in South Auckland between 11 a.m. and 4:15 p.m. on February the 13th is being asked to stay home and get tested. The Mayor of Auckland has welcomed the change in COVID-19 restrictions. Phil Goff says the short, sharp lockdown was necessary and caution is needed. He says there needs to be flexible help available to city businesses affected by the cumulative impact of lockdowns. Masks will still have to be worn on trains, buses and ferries for now, despite the change in alert levels. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says this is just a temporary measure that adds another layer of protection for the time being. She says the Cabinet is likely to consider later whether to make that a permanent measure. The National Party's playing down any damage to the Trans-Tasman relationship after the stoush over a terror suspect, saying it'll blow over. Last night, the two Prime Ministers spoke after Jacinda Ardern angrily criticised Australia for abdicating responsibility for the woman and her 2 young children detained in Turkey. She wouldn't go into detail today about their call, saying only both countries acknowledge the case has legal complexities and they're working through them. National MP Jerry Brownlee says it's good the leaders are talking.
Look, I don't think it's a huge amount of damage. You've got to see our 2 countries for the closeness that they've had since the inception of both of them as individual nations. And this is just one of those tetchy moments. It's sort of like the scrap you have with your brother or your sister. It'll pass.
Former Foreign Minister Jerry Brownlee. Christchurch earthquake anniversary commemorations are going ahead as planned after the COVID-19 alert level announcement. Monday marks 10 years since the 6.2 magnitude earthquake struck Christchurch, killing 185 people. A civic memorial service will be held at the National Earthquake Memorial along the Avon River at 12:30 on Monday afternoon. It will be live streamed, so family members overseas unable to attend due to the border closure will be able to take part. Donald Trump has launched a blistering attack on the Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell. Mr. Trump says the party will never again be strong with leaders like him. The BBC's Steve Jackson reports.
In the latest salvo in the battle for the soul of the Republican Party, a statement by Donald Trump tears into Senator McConnell in characteristic fashion. Mitch is a dour, sullen and unsmiling political hack, he says, and if Republican senators are going to stay with him, they will not win again. Mr. Trump goes on to say that things will only get worse for the party unless it turns back to his America First agenda. Senator McConnell voted to acquit Mr. Trump at his impeachment trial, but said there was no doubt he was responsible for the violent attack by his supporters on Congress.
Steve Jackson reporting. A body has been found on a beach near Dunedin. The police were called to the Hayward Point area, which is about 25 kilometres from the city near Aramoana, shortly after 12:30. Police are at the scene and working to establish what happened. It's 5 minutes past 6. The next 2 races of the America's Cup Challenger Series final are now scheduled to take place on Friday. America's Cup reporter Felicity Reid has more.
The races were originally due to be sailed today, but were postponed while Auckland was in alert level 3 lockdown. Italy's Luna Rossa lead the series 4-0 over Team UK and were pushing the event organisers to return to racing as soon as possible. The organisers, America's Cup event, and the British challengers, Team UK, wanted to delay racing until the city was back at alert level 1. However, the online racing schedule has race 5 and 6 on Friday, which is another win for the Italians. This is Felicity Reid.
The New Zealand Rowing Championships will be a condensed 3-day regatta and will start at Lake Ruataniwha in Twizel tomorrow. The championships were put on hold for 48 hours as a result of Alert Level 2 restrictions preventing mass gatherings. Ash Barty has been upset in the quarterfinals of the Australian Tennis Open in Melbourne. The world number one has been beaten by Czech 25th seed Karolina Muchova, who's come back from a set and a breakdown. Barty was attempting to become the first homegrown Australian Open champion since 1978. Muchova will square off against Jennifer Brady in the semi-finals after Brady beat Jessica Pegula in 3 sets. Meanwhile, Marcus Daniel and his Austrian playing partner Philip Oswald have been beaten in the quarterfinals of the men's doubles, ending the New Zealand Challenge in Melbourne. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, talking rehab and recovery with producer and performer Elizabeth Cracroft ahead of her Auckland Fringe show. Nigella Lawson's latest recipe book, Cook, Eat, Repeat, is this week's Hump Prize, and we have a remote sofa session with members of the New Zealand Air Force Band ahead of their Hope for South Island tour. Given they can't fit into our studio, they've set themselves up in one of their own, just for you. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, fine in the west, cloudy periods with the odd shower in the east. Auckland to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty, Central High Country and Wairarapa. Generally fine, some cloudy areas about Bay of Plenty, Taihape and Wairarapa. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mostly cloudy with a few showers, becoming fine tomorrow afternoon. For all of the South Island, fine weather, apart from cloudy areas about Bulla. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few light showers. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. If you're just joining us, some good news. From midnight tonight, Auckland will drop down to COVID Alert Level 2, whilst the rest of the country will return to Alert Level 1. That's despite 3 new cases in the community today. 2 are siblings from Papatoetoe High School and a third is a family member. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The end is in sight in Auckland, the lockdown to lift.
Based on our usual criteria, the Director-General of Health has recommended to Cabinet, and Cabinet has agreed, that as of midnight tonight, Auckland will drop down to Alert Level 2.
The good news delivered from the Prime Ministerial podium at 4:30 this afternoon, and for the rest of the country too.
The remainder of New Zealand will move to Level 1 at midnight tonight.
Jacinda Ardern came straight from a cabinet meeting. They considered all the latest information, the testing numbers and results, including 3 new COVID cases found in the community. Yes, 3 new cases. 2 more students from Papatoetoe High School, a classmate of the existing affected student, and her older brother, another in the household, has also tested positive. It's believed the original student infected her classmate, who in turn infected her family members. The whole whānau has been isolating this week, but Dr Ashley Bloomfield says authorities are now racing to establish any movements before that.
All 5 of our cases remain in a tight configuration with clear epidemiological linkages.
One of the new cases did work at McDonald's, but none were symptomatic, reducing the risk of further spread. Jacinda Ardern says she's confident the risk is low enough to relax restrictions.
Keep in mind, we have completed the testing of those close contacts, and that's where we've seen those that extra positive result from that classmate today. The remainder are what we call casual contacts. And so those are people we don't have at this stage any reason to believe are likely to produce a positive result. But even then, all of that group have been asked to stay at home. And so despite this alert level change, will not be leaving their homes.
There is one exception to the alert level change: all those connected to Papatoetoe High. Students and their families are being asked to stay home and return a negative test before returning to school on Monday. Today, students and whānau still arriving to be tested.
So I have to get retested because my results from Monday still haven't come through and I started showing symptoms.
Yeah, I've been having a bit of a sore throat and stuff, so I thought I'd better get tested. Hopefully it doesn't spread more.
The school will stay closed this week. The testing centre there will stay open, with some close contacts asked to return for another test. The The principal, Vaughan Quio, is encouraging all those who need a test to come in.
Don't panic, chill. We've been through this, we know what to do, and everyone's done everything right so far. Let's continue doing everything right.
For now, mask use on public transport will continue to be mandatory across the country. All the alert level settings will be reviewed again on Monday.
I will never be comfortable with COVID-19. There is an indescribable anxiety that comes with the daily grind of managing a pandemic, and I think we all feel it. But you do learn things. Undoubtedly, you learn things.
If there are no more cases or the situation has not materially changed, expect a further drop out of Level 2 next week. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Meanwhile, the news was met with joy and relief from some locals on Takapuna Beach this afternoon. They shared their thoughts with our reporter Alice Stewart.
I'm excited. I mean, I'm a student teacher, so I had my practicum put on hold for 3 days and I was really disappointed. Obviously, I want everyone to be safe, but I'm excited to get back in the classroom.
Oh, I'm very excited about it, as my wife and I are small business owners, so the worry for us has been whether or not we were able to actually reopen. Also just trying to look at the government subsidy to see whether we were eligible in the worst case scenario that we had to apply. So yeah, we're really excited, and hopefully the vaccines will come out soon and we'll get enough of it, and then we can sort of go back to some sense of normality.
Honestly, very relieved. I really thought we were going to go on to extended level 3, so really happy to have her back in daycare and getting back to work, because it's been difficult with the baby and no daycare.
I think it's good. So especially for the businesses and stuff, and for kids to kind of go back to school, because it's a little bit too early in the year to, there's not a lot of work to do at home. Yeah, I think it's a good decision.
And that was our reporter Alice Stewart talking to people on Takapuna Beach. The EMA has about 7,500 businesses as members, and Brett O'Reilly is the CEO. He joins me now. Brett, good news for you today?
Absolutely. We're very pleased, and so is the rest of the business community.
So, what are the challenges still at Level 2 for your members?
Well, I think, it's useful to remind people that we still have to maintain social distancing. We have to be, people need to be wearing masks with public transport, and just to be very cautious around that, making sure that in the workplace there's distancing between people and common areas. But I think, given that many of our Auckland businesses have been through the alert levels a number of times now, I think what we'll see tomorrow and what we've seen over the last 3 days is that businesses are pretty well practiced around this. So I think we'll see a high degree of compliance, and of course we need to make sure that people continue to use the contact tracing app, so that if dare we say it, we find ourselves in another situation, we know where people have been.
Brett, if people and businesses have managed to adapt since last time, why is it that they still need government support if they've been able to pivot, as it's said?
Well, I think it depends on the sector. What we've seen this week is, unfortunately, massive impact for the hospitality sector. We had Chinese New Year celebrations kicking off last weekend. We've seen a number of those events, including one we were going to be hosting on Friday, cancelled. So, those restaurants, those that will have ordered in food for those events, obviously, they've got, they can't help that, and those events won't suddenly restart. We've seen major trade shows cancelled in Auckland. We've seen events like the America's Cup, being postponed, and all of that has an impact on those businesses, particularly when an alert level is declared so quickly, as it obviously needed to be. So I think not every business will have experienced a 30% decrease over the last 7 days, or over a 7-day period, but there will be businesses that will, I'm sure, tote things up, and they'll be applying for that resurgence payment on Monday when they take into account the impact they've had over the 3 days of Alert Level 3 and hopefully just the 4 days of Alert Level 2.
Here's the thing, though. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because in some way, it's actually advantageous for your business members that this runs the whole week because they then become eligible. If we weren't in the elevated alert level after 3 days, they get nothing.
Yes, that's right. That's right. It is a dual-edged sword, and I suppose it's a recognition by the government, as the Prime Minister said today, that typically we're not going to go from an alert level 3 to alert level 1. We actually called yesterday for the government to move more quickly through the levels. We'd like to see that, because even at alert level 3, it still has a lot of disruption for business. But I guess they are recognising that if standard practice now is going to be to go up by 1 and down by 1, then there needs to be some compensation around that.
Good to talk to you, Brett. That's Brett O'Reilly, who is the CEO of the EMA. Well, joining me, first off, it's about 17 minutes past 6, and obviously you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's go to Michael Baker now, who's an epidemiologist from Otago University, and a very familiar name. Professor Baker, if you'd been in Cabinet today, is this the decision you would have made?
Well, kia ora. Yes, I think this is the right decision because the evidence was coming in that was very compelling that this was not a widespread community outbreak. And there's a plausible link for this family to the airport and to incoming travellers. So that's how it was, in the end, very different from the August outbreak we saw in Auckland last year.
In saying that, would you like there to be elevated restrictions at level 2, sort of like another half level on top of that?
Yes, look, we've been arguing for a long time that the alert level system was great when it was introduced last year, but it needs to move on and to keep ahead of the virus. And we know a lot more about how the virus is transmitted now, and it's mainly indoors in poorly ventilated environments where there's crowding, and it's in droplets and aerosols. So with that knowledge, we think there should be a lot more emphasis on the use of masks and focusing on those high-risk indoor environments.
So would it make you more comfortable if at this point, in Auckland at least, people had to wear masks all the time if they were outside, not just on public transport?
Well, I think in indoor environments, that's the problem. And remembering that the main aim of this is to get tough on the virus and have minimal restrictions on people. So that means just revising this alert level system, maybe to have a 2.5 and a 1.5, so we can be more nuanced and more geographically targeted, because that's the way we're using the system now. It's much more, if you like, surgical in its approach. And that's better because that minimises disruption for people.
What still puzzles you about this particular case? Because a couple of questions that people are asking is, if this is one of the more, spreadable strains, the UK strain, would you not expect more people to have it? And why can't we find the source?
Yeah, look, they're both really good questions. Firstly, I'd say you can't generalise about the behaviour of the virus from just a very small number of cases. Remember, it took months for researchers to work out that this was a more transmissible strain, and it was based on thousands of cases and looking at patterns. So it means that if you just have a single case or a cluster of cases, you don't necessarily see that reflected in the virus being more transmissible. It's still transmitted the same way. That hasn't really changed.
In terms of these most recent cases, we know one of them is a classmate of the original girl infected. The other is a student from the school also, but he has a job at McDonald's, right? Doesn't that sort of push out the circle of contact even further? And should we not be worried about the interactions that he's had in his work environment?
Yes, well, I think we're always concerned about contacts, but this is something that New Zealand does very well, is contact tracing. And the difference is that you've got a starting point, you know the infected people, you can look at their patterns of contact, you start to test people who are close contacts and then more distant contacts, and you very quickly get this under control. That's been the pattern in New Zealand, because we've had about one border failure or incursion every 2 to 3 weeks for the last few months. They have been well managed. We obviously want to reduce the risk of them. But the scenario that I think prompted this very vigorous response, which I think was exactly the right thing to do, was a concern that we might be seeing an iceberg effect where we had a widespread outbreak in the community, and we were just seeing the tip of that. And now that that's looking less likely, then I think we're back into a more regular contact tracing situation.
So Papatoetoe High School is due to reopen next week. What would make you think that's not a good idea? What would happen between now and then for you to say, nah, keep the school closed longer?
Well, I think we're still waiting for some test results from those other students, and if that showed that there was more transmission than we expected, that would be obviously a problem. But I think the bigger concern is really if we see cases in the community that we can't explain. And that's why the number one advice, I think, for people in Auckland at the moment is if you have cold or flu symptoms, stay at home and get tested, because that's how we'll know if there is a larger outbreak still.
Thank you for joining us. That is Professor Michael Baker, who's an epidemiologist from Otago University. Melburnians are breathing a sigh of relief as well. Victoria's 5-day circuit breaker lockdown will end tonight as planned after recording no new cases. Our World Watch reporter Paulina Lau reports.
A snap lockdown that seems to have done the job. At 11:59 local time tonight, almost all restrictions in Victoria will be lifted.
I am very, very pleased to be able to announce that, just as we indicated on Friday, this will be a 5-day short, sharp circuit breaker. That is exactly what we said we needed. That is exactly what we said would work. And we are very pleased to be able to report that progress today, not just a 0 day today, but also the fact that we've been able to contain this outbreak.
Premier Daniel Andrews made the announcement but says some rules will remain in place.
Masks, however, will be required indoors and outdoors when you cannot socially distance that 1.5 metres. You can have 5 visitors to your home, not 15, up to 20 people at public gatherings. People can return to work regardless of public or private sector, up to 50% of capacity in those workplaces.
Schools can reopen from tomorrow, but restaurants, funerals and weddings will still have gathering limits depending on density limits at the venues. As for sport, it's back on. The snap lockdown came into force last Friday over fears the more infectious UK variant had spread from a cluster of 19 cases linked to a Holiday Inn quarantine hotel at Melbourne Airport. Nearly 40,000 tests were done in the last 24 hours and the state recorded no new cases overnight. But Victoria's Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, is warning it's not over yet.
The incubation period is 14 days. There are literally thousands of people who've been potentially exposed to infectious cases. They need to see out their quarantine period. They need to not be complacent if they've got a negative test early on, because most people will be symptomatic, will test positive in the first week, but there are a proportion who might yet develop illness in the latter part of that quarantine period. There might be some people who still haven't checked the exposure sites, who've been exposed and aren't aware, who might be developing symptoms today, tomorrow, the next day.
The state will remain cautious until the end of that 14-day period, and Premier Andrews is urging residents to be vigilant. This comes one day after a shipment of the Pfizer vaccine arrived in Australia. In New South Wales, Premier Gladys Berejiklian says it's a hugely important step in the fight against COVID.
Over the next 3 weeks, 35,000 frontline workers will be vaccinated in New South Wales. In addition to all of our quarantine workers, those health workers who are highly exposed will also be getting the vaccine. So, for example, people who are taking the tests at the clinics, emergency department workers, ambulance officers, people who are on the front line.
Queensland recorded no new cases overnight and has 6 active cases. The state is also on track to begin their vaccination program on Monday.
We need the Commonwealth to guarantee the supply. If the supply comes in over this weekend, the plan is for the first 100 vaccines of Pfizer to be given on the Gold Coast on Monday. We'll have to realise that there is a plan in place for those the frontline quarantine workers to get their vaccinations first, frontline health workers. So there are responsibilities for the state for the rollout, and there are responsibilities for the Commonwealth for the rollout, especially when it comes to aged care.
Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk says the rollout will be very slow, running until around October. For Checkpoint, Paulina Lau.
To other news now, and the country's biggest construction company has made a significant lift in its earnings, thanks mainly to a strong housing market. Fletcher Building has reported a profit of $121 million for the 6 months ended December, compared with $82 million a year ago. Andrew McRae reports.
The result comes 2.5 years into the company's reset strategy, which saw a rationalisation of some of its businesses with accompanying job losses. Chief Executive Ross Taylor describes the strong performance across the company as pleasing. The company's residential housing division, called Fletcher Living, came in for mention at this morning's media briefing.
Our first half sales were up on the previous year to 515, and prices are up around 5% on average. This in turn drove strong revenue, profit and profitability for the half. Looking to the second half, we expect fewer sales in our residential business as we rebuild stock. Overall, we expect to sell around 800 houses through the full FY21 year.
Grant Swanepoel, Director of Equity Research at Jarden, wasn't surprised by the first half result, but says it came in at the top end of the company's guidance range.
I think the only surprise for us, anyway, was that they declared a first half dividend of 12 cents. They had indicated because of debt covenants they were going to potentially be conservative and pay a full year's worth of dividends, but only in the second half, so no dividends in the first half. So this does imply confidence in their cash flow in the second half, where their balance sheet is sitting.
He says the company's reset strategy is starting to pay off.
If you'd gone back 6 to 8 months, or even a year ago this time, I think we were a little sceptical that Ross was going to pull off this magician show, but he seems to be on track to be delivering on what he was promising. It's still a little bit behind on where Aussie's expected to be in the next couple of years, but the performance in domestic business has surely made up for that.
Head of Research at Fat Profits, Greg Smith, says the company's been helped by the New Zealand residential market being on fire.
Really got that coming through in terms of the residential division. You've got FOMO very much alive and well, and price increases in strength there, obviously against the backdrop of ultra low interest rates, is potentially going to drive further growth and obviously a bit of a catch up on the construction side.
Fletcher's Chief Executive Ross Taylor is expecting another solid performance in the second half through to June, but this prediction comes with a caveat.
Is that there are no major COVID-19 shocks. To date, partial lockdowns in New Zealand and the Australian states have been manageable and not overly impacted our performance. But any long-dated or higher-level lockdown of the construction industry would clearly have an impact.
The surprise payment of an interim dividend of 12 cents a share will be paid out next month. Fletcher Building is forecasting a full-year underlying profit in a range of 610 to 660 million. For Checkpoint, call Andrew McRae-Tene.
French engineers are scouring the rolling French countryside to find trees to rebuild the spire of the Notre Dame Cathedral. The cathedral in Paris was partially destroyed by fire in 2019. And as the BBC's Gareth Barlow reports, there are some strict specifications on the restoration.
Even as the embers still smouldered, tears flowed and France came to terms with its loss. Rebuilding Notre Dame was already being planned. Building the cathedral took the best part of a century. However, President Macron said its spire would soar once more in just 5 years' time. And so the search is now on to identify over 1,000 oak trees needed to rebuild the centrepiece of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. But they can't be any old trees, although they do need to be old. Each oak must stand straight, have a diameter of less than 1 metre, but more than half a metre, and be between 8 and 14 metres tall. To fulfil those criteria, each tree will need to be between 100 and 200 years old. Carpenters are now searching French woodlands and private collections to find oaks that are old enough, tall enough and straight enough. Plantations ordered by French kings to provide wood to build naval ships may now come to the rescue of 21st century engineers.
And that was Gareth Barlow reporting. Before we head off, some feedback on the suspected ISIS woman. This person says the women and children should be brought to New Zealand. They're New Zealand citizens, period. Australia has written them off. We can and should do better. Another person says, I strongly support bringing the ISIS woman and her children to New Zealand. Australia is operating in a moral vacuum. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6.